With a sexual misconduct allegation, a tattoo that led to or preceded a hasty exit from military service, and a litany of eyebrow-raising statements, Donald Trump's pick to head the Department of Defense seems to be drowning in scandal, and that's before confirmation hearings ever get underway. On Sunday, an attorney for Pete Hegseth confirmed that Hegseth paid a woman after she accused him of sexual assault, saying this in a statement, quote, "In 2023, Hegseth paid the complainant as part of a civil confidential settlement agreement and maintains his innocence." That statement comes after the Washington Post reported this, quote, "A detailed memo was sent to the Trump transition team this week by a woman who said she is a friend of the accuser." The memo, a copy of which was obtained by the Post, alleged he raped the then 30-year-old conservative group staffer in his room after drinking at the hotel bar. NBC News has not obtained the memo sent to the Trump team. None of this, though, deterring Donald Trump. The New York Times, citing two people briefed on the discussion that he is standing by Hegseth, reports this, quote, "Trump made his view plain to aides after a conversation with Hegseth days ago, after the team learned that a woman had accused him of assault in 2017. We're also learning more about an episode that Hegseth has spoken about before, his removal from a mission by the D.C. National Guard at Joe Biden's inauguration. Here's how Hegseth described the story on a podcast a few weeks ago.
I was deemed an extremist because of a tattoo by my National Guard unit in Washington, D.C., and my orders were revoked to guard the Biden inauguration. A Jerusalem cross tattoo, which is just a Christian symbol.
Is that the
this is the one.
Is that the tattoo?
Yep, right here. This one is what got me disinvited, or I've never had orders revoked before. I mean, listen, it's a standard deal.
The reporting in the Washington Post actually cast doubt on that, on Hegseth's version of events there. The Post reports that it was actually not the cross tattoo, but another one of his tattoos that set off alarm bells in military circles the day after the January 6th insurrection. From that reporting, quote, Travis Ackers, then a naval intelligence officer, told the Washington Post that he looked further and spotted a close-up image Hegseth posted of his bicep months earlier that clearly shows the words Deus Vult. Researching the phrase online, Ackers found that it was a Christian battle cry from the First Crusade in the Middle Ages. God wills it. Though the phrase remains in use among some ordinary Christians, especially Catholics, Ackers said his research showed that it had become popular with the Proud Boys, Three Percenters, and other extremist groups that participated in the siege at the Capitol. Ackers posted the photos to Twitter, which led the D.C. National Guard's head of physical security to warn that Hegseth could be a, quote, insider threat. Post adding this, quote, as he was about to be deployed, Hegseth received a call from his superior officer ordering him to stand down rather than report for duty for the inaugural events. According to Hegseth, his removal from the mission shaped his views of the military. Once more from the Washington Post, quote, he has cited the episode in asserting that the military in which he'd served in 2 wars abroad and during riots at home following the death of George Floyd had become dangerously woke. Hegseth did not respond to the Washington Post when they sought comment. Donald Trump's nominee to lead the Department of Defense, bogged down by his past statements and record, is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With me at the table, host of the Independent Americans podcast and founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Paul Rieckhoff, is back. Also joining us, Politico national correspondent and MSNBC contributor Betsy Woodruff Swan is back, and former Democratic Senator, MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill is here. Betsy, let me start with you on the body of reporting shaping up. I think that what people who watch him might have seen was sort of maybe if they have an affinity for the affable anti-woke genre. This reporting seems to at least deepen that caricature in that he's someone who was cast out of service on the day of Joe Biden's inauguration because of a belief that he could be an insider threat. Take me inside that thread of reporting.
Yeah, what's important to know here, of course, is that the concerns regarding Hegseth came from his fellow soldiers. It came from the unit that he was part of, the National Guard organization. Senior enough people above him in the chain of command believed that this tattoo that he had, again, regardless of the reasons that he got it, they were convinced that it was a symbol he could pose a threat going into the presidential inauguration. What's also important to remember here is that none of this is going to have any impact whatsoever on Trump's support for his nominee. Anything that people argue related to Hegseth, the accusations he's facing, the news that's coming forward that without a doubt is raising concerns more broadly about the way that he would lead the Defense Department, none of that is going to shape Trump's view, because it very much points to the fact that Hegseth embodies Trump himself and the goals that Trump would have for the military. The fact that Hegseth has been accused of sexual assault, that's not going to slow down Trump. He himself, of course, faces those same accusations. The fact that Hegseth is accused of playing footsie with extremism, of supporting extremist rhetoric, either deliberately or inadvertently, that won't slow down Trump whatsoever either. And this story involving Trump and Hegseth is a microcosm of the broader shift that we're seeing going into this second Trump term in comparison to his first time in office. At this point in time, late 2016, early 2017, Trump was building out a cabinet that included some people from the national security establishment who were very, very much seen as normal, typical, respectable. We're talking about people like Jim Mattis, John Kelly, and shortly after Trump was inaugurated, also H.R. McMaster, who, of course, replaced his first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, who was removed in part because of very troubling connections that he had, troubling activity he was engaged in. Now it is so different. Right from the jump, Trump is filling his cabinet with people who very much channel his instincts, channel his political goals, channel his policy goals, and after his inauguration will be ready to hit the ground running, doing whatever Trump wants to see done on the part of these departments and agencies to advance his goals. And of course, if Hegseth is confirmed, the number one thing to watch for is how he instructs the Defense Department to cooperate with Trump's promise of mass deportations. When Trump is looking at DOD, that's one of the first things he's going to be talking about, how he can use the Defense Department on U.S. soil to help augment law enforcement activity. And of course, Trump sees Hegseth as a key person in that plan.
I have no doubt that this probably raises his stock in Trump's view, but that's not the issue. I mean, the military can't function if it turns on itself. And I wonder what the placement of someone like Hegseth, a top DOD, does to the military.
It crushes morale. It creates consternation. It impacts recruiting and retention. But that's in part what they want to do. I mean,
why?
Pete Hegseth is a culture warrior. We've talked about this before. He's a very effective culture warrior. And Trump is sending him to the Pentagon to wage culture war on the Pentagon. And he said that wokeism is the problem. Wokeism is not the problem in the military, but military sexual assault is, and extremism is. And even if he has no associations, even if he's innocent, this looks terrible, and it should be disqualifying. He's being nominated for a position that used to be occupied by Republicans like Bob Gates and Dick Cheney and Chuck Hagel. Can you imagine if Chuck Hagel had these tattoos and was accused of these things? He would be disqualified. So I think we're coming into a guardrail moment where moderate Republicans like Mitt Romney and Susan Collins and others are going to have to decide, is this acceptable? Is this an acceptable level of risk to impose on 2.7 million people who work at the Pentagon and inside the Defense Department?
I mean, I guess my question, I want to press you on the sexual assault allegations. I mean, you've got in the reporting in the Post and the New York Times, you've got a confirmed police report from the Monterey Police. You've got a confirmed rape kit result. You've got a letter sent to the transition team, and it's clear that the Trump, let's just keep this in MAGA world. It's clear that the Trump transition team felt blindsided by this. What is the implication for the military and for the military's ability to root out and protect men and women in the military from sexual assault if the person atop the department is an accused assaulter?
Well, this is the cascading effect of the command climate that Trump himself has created. We said that these were the things that should disqualify him as commander-in-chief. The voters thought otherwise. Now he's placing people who are going to echo that kind of command climate. These are all chips off the old block right here. I mean, that's true across the board. And he's also got a very radical pick for VA secretary. So they're going to be bookend culture warriors attacking both the DOD and the VA simultaneously and trying to meet in the middle in a way that satisfies Trump's goals. But keep in mind, we've got women in combat right now. They are forward deployed in places like Syria and around the world, and they have to trust the people who lead them. And how can they honestly trust a person like this with this many allegations? And even more importantly, a person who says he wants them out of combat roles. We can talk about his personal issues. We can talk about disqualifying, but the policy issues are also very important. He wants to remove women from combat roles while they are actively serving in combat roles. That's something that not only Trump is going to celebrate, our enemies will celebrate. Vladimir Putin, North Korea, they love to see this kind of disruption in our military while we're trying to keep things warm and settled around the globe.